What if I told you we're repeating the exact pattern that ended in disaster again? Not theory, measurable cycle. Germany wallpapered homes with money. Zimbabwe printed a $100 trillion note. Venezuela erased 99.9% of savings. Now, in 2025, the warning lights are flashing in the US too. In the next few minutes, I'll show you 3 hard signals you can check in your own life. Don't miss this. Have you ever seen money used as wallpaper? In 1923, Germany's currency became so worthless, people did just that. A loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. Workers got paid twice a day because their money lost half its value by lunchtime. Fast forward to 2008, Zimbabwe printed a $100 trillion note, which couldn't even buy you a bus ticket. Then, in 2018, Venezuela, a country with massive oil reserves, saw its currency lose 99.9% of its value. 3 countries, 3 total currency collapses, all following the exact same disastrous pattern. Here's the scary part. Since 2020, central banks worldwide have printed more money than all 3 of those nations combined before their economies imploded. We aren't just following the same path. We seem to be speeding down it. Think about that. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more insights. Have you ever wondered what happens when a country's money just dies? This isn't some abstract economic theory. This is the real story of how nations destroy their own currencies, why they always think it will be different this time, and why the math says we could be next. Before we get into the historical pattern, you need to understand what hyperinflation actually feels like on the street. Forget the official definition of 50% inflation per month. When it truly takes hold, prices can double every day, then every hour. Imagine this. You go to work on a Monday. Your salary hits your account at noon. By the time you leave the office at 5 p.m., that money has already lost a third of its value. The grocery store has raised its prices twice since you arrived. The gas station updates its prices by the hour. You rush to buy anything real, anything tangible, before your money becomes worthless paper. But so is everyone else. Shelves are empty within hours. The cash in your pocket feels like it's burning a hole because you know tomorrow it will buy half as much. Your life savings. Gone. It doesn't matter if you saved diligently for 30 years, it evaporates in a matter of weeks. Pensions become worthless jokes. Insurance policies pay out in money that can't even buy a single meal. Government bonds, they might as well be toilet paper. Anyone who trusted the system, who saved in the national currency, who followed all the rules, loses everything. This isn't a hypothetical scenario. This is exactly what happened in Weimar Germany, in Zimbabwe, and in Venezuela. And it happened because their governments did exactly what many are doing right now. They printed money to solve problems that printing money simply cannot solve. And right up until the final collapse, they all believed their situation was different, that it couldn't happen to them. Let's look at the blueprint. The first modern hyperinflation. Weimar Germany in 1923. Every hyperinflation since has followed this exact script. After World War I, Germany was hit with a massive bill, 132 billion gold marks in war reparations, about $1.4 trillion in today's money. Germany didn't have it. The war had wrecked their economy, unemployment was soaring, and tax revenues had collapsed. So, the German government faced a choice. Either default on the payments and risk military occupation, or print the money to pay the debt. They chose to print, and this is the starting point for every hyperinflation story. A government that cannot or will not live within its means. At first, it seemed manageable. The central bank started expanding the money supply in 1919. Prices rose, sure, but not catastrophically. The government told its people it was temporary, that it was necessary to rebuild trust the process, they said. By 1921, the exchange rate was 60 marks to the dollar. Not great, but survivable. Then came 1922. France occupied Germany's industrial heartland, the Ruhr, demanding the reparation payments. Workers went on strike, and production ground to a halt. But the government kept paying those striking workers with newly printed money. More and more of it, this was the acceleration phase, the point of no return. By the end of 1922, it took 7,400 marks to buy $1. People were worried, but most still believed the government had it under control. They didn't. The printing had already crossed the line from monetary policy to monetary suicide. In January, it was 17,000 marks to the dollar. Let's make that real. In January 1923, a loaf of bread cost 250 marks. By November, that same loaf cost 200 billion marks. A single egg, 80 billion marks. People were paid twice a day and would run to the stores on their lunch break just to spend their wages before they became worthless by the afternoon. Restaurants changed their menu prices while you were still eating your meal. People used wheelbarrows to carry cash because it was too worthless to even bother counting. They burned stacks of money for heat because it was cheaper than buying firewood. The entire middle class was destroyed. Anyone who had savings in marks, anyone on a fixed income like a pension or salary, was wiped out overnight. Society fractured. Crime skyrocketed. Political extremism surged. And it was out of that chaos that the Nazis rose to power. Hyperinflation didn't just destroy a currency, it destroyed the very fabric of society. It shattered faith in government, in markets, and in the future itself. Thanks for watching. If you found this insightful, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content that dives deep into the forces shaping our world. See you in the next one. Germany swore they'd never let it happen again. But 85 years later, another country followed the exact same script. This is the story of Zimbabwe in the 2000s. Picture it, a nation with solid infrastructure, an educated population, and massive agricultural exports. It was known as the breadbasket of Africa. Then, a series of government decisions under Robert Mugabe set the stage for one of the most catastrophic economic collapses in modern history. It all started in the year 2000. The government began seizing privately owned farms and redistributing them. Almost overnight, agricultural production, the backbone of the economy, collapsed. Food exports dried up, the economy started shrinking, and tax revenues plummeted. The government faced the same choice Germany did back in 1919, either tighten the belt and live within its means, or fire up the printing presses to cover the shortfall. They chose to print. By 2003, inflation hit 600%. That's bad, but it wasn't a total catastrophe yet. The government claimed it was just temporary. They blamed international sanctions, they blamed external forces, they blamed everyone except their own money printing. By 2006, inflation jumped to 1,200%. The Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe just kept printing, bankrolling government salaries, funding the military, and paying for projects the country simply couldn't afford. This is where things started to spiral out of control. In 2007, inflation exploded to a mind-boggling 100,000%. Store shelves were bare, factories were closing down, and people were fleeing the country in droves. What was the government's response? You guessed it, print even more money. They also introduced price controls, a move that history shows always makes a bad situation worse. Why? Because producers couldn't sell their goods at the mandated low prices without taking a huge loss, so they just stopped producing altogether. Supply vanished, and prices on the black market shot through the roof. Then came 2008, the year Zimbabwe's economy went down in the history books for all the wrong reasons. In January, inflation was at 100,000%. By June, it had rocketed to 11 million%. By July, the government couldn't even calculate it anymore and stopped releasing official statistics. But independent economists did the math. The annual inflation rate peaked at 89.76 trillion%. That's a 22-digit number. Let me put that into perspective for you. At that rate, prices were doubling every 24 hours. A soda that cost $1 Zimbabwean dollar on Monday morning would cost $2 on Tuesday, $4 on Wednesday, and by the next Monday, that same soda would cost $128. Imagine your weekly groceries becoming 128 times more expensive in just 7 days. The Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe was printing money so fast they issued a $100 trillion banknote. That's not a typo, single bill, with a 1 and 14 zeros. And what could you buy with it? Not even 3 eggs. People completely abandoned the currency. They went back to bartering. They used US dollars, South African rand anything, but the worthless Zimbabwe dollar. The country's GDP was cut in half. Unemployment soared to 94%. Malnutrition was rampant, with life expectancy dropping from 60 to just 34 years in a single decade. The nation faced cholera outbreaks and a total breakdown of society. Finally, in 2009, Zimbabwe officially abandoned its currency. They had literally printed it into non-existence. The Zimbabwe dollar, which had once been more valuable than the US dollar, was gone. Everyone who had saved money in that currency lost everything. Decades of hard work wiped out in an instant. And just like before, the world watched and said it could never happen to us. Zimbabwe was different: bad governance, unique circumstances. But it wasn't unique. It was the same pattern, the same choices, and the same inevitable math. This story is a powerful reminder of how fragile economies can be and the devastating consequences of certain financial decisions. Fast forward 10 years, and history repeated itself, this time in South America. Venezuela, a nation sitting on the largest proven oil reserves on the planet, more than even Saudi Arabia. Back in 2001, they were the richest country in South America. Their GDP per capita was higher than Brazil's. They had universal health care, free education, and a functioning democracy. Then, Hugo Chavez, and later Nicolas Maduro, made the same fatal choices that every government facing hyperinflation makes. They rolled out massive social programs without the income to back them up. They nationalized industries, imposed price controls, and when tax money ran dry, they did the one thing that guarantees disaster. They printed money. From 2012 to 2017, Venezuela's money supply exploded by 14,000%. Not 14%, 14%, 14,000%. The central bank ran the printing presses around the clock, just to fund government spending and cover deficits for programs they couldn't afford. By 2016, inflation had skyrocketed to 800%. Store shelves were barren. The government pointed fingers at hoarders and economic warfare. They enforced strict price controls, forcing businesses to sell goods at a loss. Unsurprisingly, those businesses just stopped producing. Supply vanished. The next year, 2017, inflation hit an unbelievable 2,600%. People were so desperate they started eating out of trash cans. Zoos reported animals disappearing, later found butchered for food. Hospitals ran out of the most basic supplies, and the power grid failed constantly. The bolivar, their currency, was dying, but the government just kept printing more of it. In 2018, the collapse went into overdrive. Inflation hit 1.3 million%, then 2.6 million. By the end of the year, estimates put it at a mind-boggling 10 million%. To put that in perspective, a carton of eggs that cost 200 bolivars in January would cost 200 million by December. The government printed a 1 million bolivar note, but within months, it couldn't even buy a cup of coffee. They tried to fix it by removing 5 zeros from the currency in 2018, rebranding it the sovereign bolivar. It failed instantly. They did it again in 2021, lopping off another 6 zeros. That failed too. By 2019, over 5 million Venezuelans had fled, becoming refugees. Those who stayed lost an average of 24 pounds from malnutrition. Doctors and engineers abandoned their careers. Some turned to prostitution because it paid more. The country's GDP collapsed by 75%, a downturn worse than the Great Depression. Venezuela's economy shrank more than Germany's did after World War II. Today, the country has essentially dollarized. The worthless Bolivians they printed into oblivion have been replaced by the US dollar in most transactions. Everyone who trusted their government, who saved in the local currency, lost everything. We've seen this story before: Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, and Venezuela. Different places, different times, different politics, but the exact same choices, the exact same devastating result. And the scariest part, the largest economies on Earth are now making those very same choices. Let's break down a pattern. Once you see it, you'll understand why what's happening right now should terrify you. Stage 1, the trigger. Every hyperinflation starts with a crisis. For Germany, it was war reparations. For Zimbabwe, agricultural collapse. For Venezuela, falling oil prices and socialism. This crisis creates a massive budget shortfall. Tax revenue plummets, but spending commitments stay the same or even increase. Stage 2, the choice. The government faces a decision: cut spending, raise taxes, default on its debts, or print money to cover the gap. Cutting spending is political suicide. Raising taxes won't bring in enough cash fast enough. Defaulting means a total loss of power. So, they print. They always print. Stage 3, the justification. The government claims it's just temporary. a bridge to get to better times. They'll say, this is modern monetary theory, or we're different, we have resources, we'll grow our way out of this. The experts all agree, the central bank supports it. Now, think back to March 2020. The world faced a crisis, lockdowns, and an economic shutdown. Governments all over the globe faced the exact same choice that every hyperinflationary government has faced. They could either accept the pain and let the economy adjust, or print money to paper over the damage. They printed trillions and trillions of dollars, euros, yen, and yuan. Every major central bank opened the floodgates. The U.S. Federal Reserve's balance sheet exploded from $4 trillion in February 2022 over $9 trillion by April 2022. The U.S. government spent $5 trillion in COVID relief money created from thin air and deposited directly into bank accounts. The European Central Bank expanded its balance sheet by over $4 trillion. The Bank of Japan continued its decades of money printing. China injected trillions of yuan. Everywhere, the response was the same. Print money now, worry about the consequences later. And just like in Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, and Venezuela, the governments told us it was temporary, that it was necessary to save the economy. They said, we'll unwind it later. They told us modern monetary theory proves we can handle this, and that inflation is just transitory. They told us to trust the experts. For a little while, it seemed to work. In 2020 and 2021, all that printed money propped up the markets. Stock prices soared, real estate exploded, crypto went vertical. Anyone who owned assets got richer. They called it the wealth effect. But by late 2021, inflation started to creep in. By 2022, it was undeniable. The US hit 9.1% official inflation in June of that year. Europe hit double digits. The UK saw inflation rates not seen since the 1980s. The price of everything surged. Food, energy, housing, everything. And what was the response? Exactly what every hyperinflation government does. They blamed external forces, Putin's war, supply chains, corporate greed. It was never the money printing, never the trillions created from nothing. And while they did raise interest rates to fight inflation, they haven't stopped the printing. The Fed's balance sheet is still over $7 trillion, double what it was before the pandemic. Government spending hasn't stopped. The deficits continue. The printing continues. We are in stage 4. The acceleration phase. We've printed more money in the last 5 years than we did in the entire previous decade. The justifications are the same. The excuses are the same. The pattern is the same. The only question is how far we'll go before the math finally catches up with us. Let's check the warning signs, the indicators that appeared right before every other hyperinflationary collapse. Massive money supply expansion? Check. The M2 money supply in the U.S. increased by 40% from 2020 to 2022. That's an unprecedented expansion in peacetime. Government deficits out of control. Check. The U.S. is projected to run a $1.8 trillion deficit in 2024, over 6% of GDP. This is happening in a supposedly growing economy. Japan's debt is 264% of its GDP. These are not signs of a healthy system. Rising inflation, despite government claims it's under control, check the official numbers say 3 to 4%. But real inflation, the prices you actually pay for food, housing, and insurance is far higher. They hide the reality with things like shrinkflation, substitution, and hedonic adjustments. Asset price inflation completely disconnected from economic fundamentals. Check. Stock markets are hitting all-time highs while real wages are falling. Real estate is unaffordable for entire generations. Wealth inequality is at levels we haven't seen since the 1920s. An emerging loss of faith in the currency. Check. Bitcoin exists for a reason. People don't trust central banks. Gold prices are hitting record highs. The BRICS nations are developing alternative payment systems. Foreign central banks are reducing their holdings of US dollars. The cracks are starting to show. Political justification for continued spending. Check. Every crisis is used to justify more spending and more printing. Climate change, infrastructure, defense, social programs. There's always a reason. There's never a plan to stop. Germany thought they'd stop after paying reparations. Zimbabwe thought they'd stop once land reform stabilized. Venezuela thought they'd stop once oil prices recovered. None of them stopped. Because once you start, stopping means accepting the devastating consequences of what you've done, and no government willingly chooses to collapse. The pattern is here. We are following it. The only question is how fast it will accelerate and how bad the ending will be. 3 times in the last century, major economies followed this exact pattern: Weimar, Germany, Zimbabwe, and Venezuela. And each time, they thought they were different. Each time, the math won. You cannot print prosperity. You cannot create wealth from nothing, and you cannot avoid the consequences of monetary expansion forever. The bill always comes due. The only question is when. Since 2020, the world's major economies have printed more money than all 3 of those hyperinflation examples combined. The Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, the People's Bank of China, they are all running the same playbook that failed catastrophically 3 times before. We're told it's different this time. We have better tools, better economists, a better understanding. We can manage this. That's exactly what they said in Weimar, in Zimbabwe, and in Venezuela, right up until the collapse. History doesn't repeat itself perfectly, but it echoes, and right now, that echo is deafening. We're in stage 4 of the pattern, the acceleration phase. This is the point where every previous example lost control, where printing just led to more printing, where inflation became exponential, and where the currency began its death spiral. Maybe we'll find a way out. Maybe modern central banks can thread a needle that's never been threaded before. Maybe we'll gently unwind $20 trillion in printed money without any consequences. People keep saying, maybe this time it's different. And I get it. We all want to believe that. But when you look closely, the pattern says otherwise. The cold, hard math says otherwise. And history, which has already seen this exact scenario play out 3 separate times, is practically screaming that we're about to learn the same painful lesson all over again. It's not about being pessimistic. It's about being prepared. If this gave you a new perspective on what might be just around the corner, make sure you subscribe, because when this pattern finally completes, you'll want to understand exactly what happened and why. The answers are all there, hidden in history. I'll show you where to look.